Hello, my name is Tara.
And my name is Mimi. Today we are talking to a few of the students from the 12 ambassador schools who have taken part in the cross-cultural study of student leadership in Round Square schools.
Over the past 12 months, 26 students from 12 Round Square schools around the world have been working with the Education University of Hong Kong as research ambassadors on a study of cross-cultural leadership in Round Square schools. They have gathered data, interviewed students and teachers at their schools, and authored their own research papers on student leadership from 12 perspectives.
6,760 teenagers, as well as 1,695 teachers in Round Square schools in 34 countries took part in the survey. 114 students and teachers were also interviewed. This incredible body of work would not have been possible without the assistance provided by the student research ambassadors.
The research study has been published, and you can find the research report and the Student Perspectives Anthology on the Round Square website. In this podcast, we will be asking some of the student ambassadors about their observations. What trends did they see emerge from the interviews they conducted?
We were also interested in how their perceptions were affected by what they heard from other students and teachers at their school. Firstly, let's hear what Callan, one of the research ambassadors, has to say about being involved in the interviewing process.
It was very interesting to hear what everyone had to say, and every single time we had an interview, I left the venue thinking to myself, that was really interesting. I should remember that.
The researchers found that students' attitudes and ideas about leadership are more systematic than hierarchical, and report a belief in students that effective leadership involves collaboration, ethical conduct, and service.
The students and teachers who responded to the study believe that leadership is a learned skill. Here's what Sharon, Jared, Tori, and Nefertiti had to say.
Most of our interviewees believe that leaders were not born, but rather leadership can be learned. Some said how people may have an edge with their personality traits, but it would have to be nurtured.
Many of the interviewees said that they showed leadership through a setting that wasn't necessarily a formal leadership position, and the general consensus was that formal leadership positions was not the only way to show leadership. For example, setting a good example for those around you is another way to really show your leadership without being a part of a formal leadership position.
I found people who are in formal position of leaderships might not consider themselves as leader, and vice versa, the people might not have a leadership position but consider themselves as some sort of leader in the community.
They did agree that informal leadership roles were important, but just not in a classroom setting. They felt that in a classroom setting, a lot of the times it is the person with the loudest voice who would end up securing more of a leadership position, and not necessarily the person who was best fitted to the leadership role.
The data from the study also showed that leadership role models are all around us. The research team found that while students consider global youth leaders such as Greta Thunberg and Malala Yousafzai to be sources of inspiration, their positive leadership role models are, in fact, found closer to home.
It revealed that students' most impactful lessons in leadership come from those family members, friends, and teachers whose capacity to overcome adversity, work collaboratively, and enthuse others provides them with accessible real-world examples.
Ciara Yulin Amu talked to us about some of their observations.
And it was interesting to see how everybody had a different range, but at the same time, different answers complemented each other. For example, we had about 3 students from the same grade level bringing up the same person that they looked up to in a leadership position. And it was really cool because we knew the person that they were talking about. It was an older student. So it really portrayed that sense of community in our school and just showed us how good of a leader this person is, and it was great how all these 3 younger students could appreciate that and look up to that good leadership.
Yes, what also was very nice to see was that many students agreed on the same topics, although they of course had no idea of what the other people were saying. Many of their opinions were similar to each other, and then when looking at it from the teacher's point of view, there were some things that were totally different, and that just reflected a bit on that one question of the entire interview, if young people see leadership different than adults, for example.
What surprised me the most when we're doing our research was the intelligence of the answers from some of the younger grade members. I think they gave very interesting perspectives on leadership, and it definitely shows a promising future in terms of leadership for our country.
As a final step in their research journey, the 26 student ambassadors were asked to conduct their own research exploration. Each of the 12 ambassador schools was asked to explore the concept of leadership through the lens of one of the round square discoveries. To do this, the research ambassadors invited a group of students to come together in a baraza group for a discussion on leadership in their context.
Ciara and her partner connected appreciation of diversity with identity.
One question we asked during the interviews was whether people thought identity impacts your ability to be a leader or how people perceive one as a leader. So stereotypically, we thought identity usually comes down to race, gender, and sexuality, usually are quite common topics when people talk about identity. But quite surprisingly, not one person out of all of our interviewees mentioned any of those things. They were all thinking about your characteristics, morals, and principles, like who you are as a person, like what you're interested in, and all things that are incredibly valuable and important as a leader. We were just extremely surprised because a lot of people do see identity as those things, gender, sexuality, and race. And we thought it was quite interesting and also a sort of a positive thing that nobody in our international school, because it's so international and people are so used to appreciating diverse cultures and people, and doesn't matter where you're from, you have an equal opportunity to be a leader at our school. And generally in international schools, I think the students grow up without thinking that this should change, and it shouldn't. Of course, sadly, in the world, historically, it has been shown to make an impact, whether you're a man or a woman, or what your religion is, where you come from, what your sexuality is. But the fact that nobody said anything negative about this, we thought was extremely positive.
Nefertiti was exploring the round square discovery, inventiveness.
In the context of our ideal, which was inventiveness, one of the round square ideals, I found that people were a lot more open during the Baraza discussion, especially when they found out that whatever was being discussed was going to be recorded so that we could use it to write our research paper, but wasn't going to be shared with anyone else. And I feel like that created an element of a very relaxed environment. People felt a lot more relaxed and a lot more able to freely share their opinions on leadership in the context of inventiveness, of course. Something that surprised me about the results that I collected, of course, we expected people to have different thoughts and opinions on leadership, but we didn't expect people's perspectives to vary to the extent that they did. We found that people's views on leadership and, for example, what makes a good leader relied heavily on their own personal experiences. And so depending on their own personal experiences, they either viewed a good leader as being strong, whereas someone else believed that a good leader should be more compassionate and understanding. And that all depended upon their social standing, for example, their race, and all of those different factors. We realized that their thoughts on leadership weren't just formed by, or rather based upon one aspect of their lives, but comprised of a myriad of different factors, really. And I think that was one of the things that we didn't really anticipate when we first began the interviews.
Jamie reflected on the development of his understanding of courage and leadership.
I think I was really able to tackle the perspective of courage, and I have lived by this since I've written the report, as it taught me so much. I have a leadership position at school this year, and I've already done a speech on it, but I think that being courageous is, in the name, it's almost one of the hardest things to do. But being courageous is essentially taking that extra step in life. It can be within the smallest things as well. It's emphasised within our school community, but being courageous doesn't have to be standing up in front of the whole school and saying this or expressing this. It starts from the ground up, trying that new sport, talking to that girl even, putting yourself in a situation where you know you feel uncomfortable. But I think being courageous is the difference between what makes us happy and not, almost, as I feel that my best experiences have come when I've stepped out of my comfort zone and tried something new and found to love it. It could be seen as a way that people can express themselves in ways that make them, I guess, unique from others. Like, for example, our school is very strong on their rugby and rowing and cricket, but the first 15 captain last year was also the head in the drama production, which I think is amazing. It's just being courageous can break those stereotypes that, I guess, last forever. It essentially, for me, it positively affects my leadership, adding new attributes. As being courageous on behalf of a group is a perfect way to almost shortcut those goals. I guess standing up for what is right, like even in the school setting, like it takes courage to remind peers to make good decisions when they're having fun, which is so hard as a teenager. It also takes extreme amount of courage to challenge decisions made by friends because you don't want to be looked down as the party pooper. I think almost I'll finish with courage supports leaders to do what is right rather than what is compliant. That's the difference, I believe, between good leadership and great leadership.
Finally, we asked the student ambassadors what they hoped would be an outcome of this report. This is Tori and Nefertiti.
To raise awareness that leadership is not only commending on others, but it is also that student leadership is an important way to empowering students for them to take on leadership roles in the community and beyond.
But one of the other things that I hope will be the outcome of this report is that my generation, the youth of today, will realize that they need to start thinking about leadership, actively thinking about leadership from a young age, because it's easy to talk about leadership, but it's another thing to actually practice leadership, especially good leadership, however one would define that. It's one thing to talk about it, but another thing to practice it. And I think it's important for people to actively incorporate good leadership skills into their daily lives, be it in a formal leadership position or simply in their mundane day-to-day activities, because leadership comes in all forms, as we know. And I think it's important for people to realize that, because I think a misconception that a lot of people have is that they only need to be leaders when they're in a formal leadership position.
Thank you for joining us today to listen to some of the findings from the Cross-Cultural Leadership Report. And a special thank you to all of the student ambassadors who took part in this project and to those who shared their reflections with us today.